I'm the clapper now.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Rob Paterson. I sound English, but I was born in Montreal a very long time ago and moved to England when I was 4, where my English accent was beaten out of me pretty quickly in the local playground. The house next to us was a bomb site. London hadn't changed from the war at all. Rationing was still on. It was quite a culture shock. I lived almost a Victorian childhood. I saw my mother on Thursday for lunch. That was it. I can't remember the first time I saw my father. I was probably around about 7. And I went through a whole English institutional kind of life, which feeds a lot into what I write about now. And then the whole family moves to West Africa, Ghana, where I went to school there for a while. That was something. My sister and I were sent to Ghana International School. School began at 7 a.m. in the morning. It's on the equator, very hot. No electricity, no air conditioning. And school finished at 12 noon. Went to boarding school whilst I was, after a year at school in Ghana, back in England, and spent most of that part of my life, so till I was 21, when I graduated from Oxford, in England, either at boarding school or at university. And then later on I spent nearly 3 years visiting Ukraine, just after, all work related, but just after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I say all these things because a lot of my books draw on ancient cultures, tribal cultures, cultures based on honor, I'm very fortunate to have actually lived in some of these places and been with people who behave very differently from what they do here. And I returned to Canada, partially because I'd been to Expo 67. I thought, God, I could live here. I returned to Canada in 1972, and I married a girl from Montreal, and we lived all in different places in Canada. I lived in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And they moved us back to London, where we spent another 10 years. I had 2 children, well, still do, but the children arrived at that time. And I think we thought I was going to be there for the duration, but we weren't. And we moved back to Canada in 1988, and I finally left the corporate world in '94, and within a year or so had moved to Prince Edward Island, where we spent nearly 20 years. And that's where I really found my rural life again. And I really, small town life, community life is what I find the most comfortable kind of living. And again, those values threaded through most of my writing. I was one of the early bloggers, and that was I think there were about 60,000 of us around about 2001 in the whole world, and I found that very, very helpful. I hadn't written anything properly before then. And from that, in my blogging, I was writing about what was it like to leave the corporate world. Those were the messages and the ideas. And I wrote a series of 3 books there, partly about why you don't need to have a job. I don't mean why you don't need to have a paycheck. I say why you don't need to have a job. And I wrote a book about how you can take control of your own health and why you don't need a bank to get credit. They were the ideas. I thought if people were going to move out of the system, that if they could work these things out for themselves, they'd be able to give themselves a fair amount of independence. I thought I was going to write a lot more of those books, but I didn't, and they were non-fiction. I have a granddaughter who's now 12, and when she was a little girl, she was very keen on zombies. And I was thinking about Sleeping Beauty, and I was thinking, what if zombies and Sleeping Beauties were kind of real? And I thought I'd write a series starting with that idea. There's a girl who's been cursed in some way, and she's been hidden away because she's very dangerous. And she's going to be awakened by a young man. And what might that really mean? And that's the beginning of a 9-book series, which has morphed a lot since then. They escape through time, and it's given me a chance to make it more of a historical novel, or a series of historical novels. But in the interim, I got distracted. A lot of family issues a lot of family dysfunctions. My family would be right up, starring in all the dysfunctional films. It's why I find it very difficult to watch films about those kind of things, because it just reminds me too much. My grandfather was in France from February 1915 to September 1918, and a lot of the problems in our family stem from what happened to him. And about 4 years ago, I decided I was going to write about that. And again, I thought I was just going to write about him, but you know, these projects start that. And I found myself writing about his group in Montreal as a whole way of looking at what happened to Montreal society in the First World War. And I think that's the biggest book I've done. So it takes you from before 1914, looking at men and women. And a lot of the key characters are in the book. You know, I thought I was going to be writing about soldiers at the front. I do. But more than half the book is about their daughters, their wives, their girlfriends, and their mothers. And you know, the Lusitania sinks, and we've got 6 family members on the Lusitania, you know, and it's the children who die. You know, life was normal for everybody in the summer of 1914. And by the end of the war, life had changed completely. This terrible thing had chewed everybody up. It affected everybody. And I feel, in a way, that what we're going through now is very similar to that, particularly in that they all thought the war was going to be over very quickly. So in March of this year, we all think, oh well, you know, this summer it'll be okay and we'll be fine. And we all had a great deal of trust in the government, I think, as this began. I think, unfortunately, we're still going to be in this for years to come. And that's how people found themselves in the First World War. And the lesson that I learned in writing this book is that the only thing that will get you through it is love and your relationships. It's the only way that these things can be, in the end, either understood or tolerated. And I think that's why I think this book is, you know, it's meaningful for me, because it explains my family to me, but I think it's meaningful to the reader because it explains how to behave when all the rules are gone and when everything you thought was good and normal have gone too. How has COVID affected my writing? It's been beneficial. It's given me more time, and what it's done by that is it's cut out, and I'm a very social person. So there's nothing I like better than sitting in the now Sapin or the Star Cafe, you know, chatting with friends and stuff like that. And it's cut all that social face-to-face side of my life out. And that's given me, it's not that given me more time per se, but more energy. Because I can only write, and I think this is true for most people, about 3 hours a day. And then whatever you do after that has to be mechanical, like editing or something, because your creative juices really stop working well after about 3 hours. The most important advice for anybody writing books is don't bet your mortgage on being able to make a living out of this. There's something called the Pareto curve. And it goes like this, and it's the natural distribution for any creative work. So there are, in the whole world of opera, there are 30 people who make millions. There are 200 who make a decent living, and everybody else scrabbles. And it's the same in every creative endeavor. So don't write to make money. Write because you have to, and because it makes you feel good. Write for pure reasons to begin with. You may be lucky and get a contract and all that kind of thing. And don't write also for an audience. Write what you want. You'll see any successful artist, whether they're a painter, a musician, it doesn't matter. They have a style. The style is theirs. They bring themselves to the world, and the world may not recognize them for a while, but it's okay. If you write for yourself, the satisfaction comes with, God, I've solved that problem. Some people are very organized when they write. They plot the whole thing out, and it's like paint by numbers. I don't mean that to be disparaging. I just mean it to, they've got it all planned, right? I don't do that at all, because what I enjoy discovering what the hell's going on. And so I'll set myself up a problem, and I will find a way to get through it. And that is like being a detective, but you're in your own case, And so there's an enormous amount of satisfaction. If I'm feeling overwhelmed or stuck, those kind of things, or I'll often get onto another book. So at the moment, I'm halfway through the second book in my 9-book series. I've stopped that because I got kind of bogged down. And I wrote a very short book about Winston Churchill and my school. We went to the same school, but yeah, a few years apart. And then I wrote this history book, and I'm now looking forward to going back to the other one. So I'm able now to write more than one, sometimes more than 2 books at the same time, and I find leaving things very helpful. There's a strong message in my books about honor, being loyal, being devoted to your friends, doing the right thing, having the courage to do dangerous things with other people. The great bonding experience that I've found in real life and in history is that real deep relationships usually arise from sharing suffering together. I was once asked, my grandfather's experience in the war, what did he take from that? How did he do it? And he told my father, because I didn't ask him, but he told my father that it was the men, the relationships they had with each other. And they were very different. They came from all walks of life. But I think this shared achievement and the shared suffering brought them together. And I think modern life is all about avoiding pain, suffering, doing everything for yourself, and my books are not about that. They're about doing things with each other for the reasons that you think are right. In my books, you'll find most of the baddies, you can understand them. You don't have to like them. You can understand them. And most of the goodies, they have their off days too. And I enjoy this exploration of we're all frail people and we can all be good or not. One of the questions today that's always asked is, if you didn't live it, if you aren't this, then you can't write about it. And I've always thought that ridiculous, particularly writing historical fiction. I wasn't a Roman soldier, but I think a couple of things that really helped me here write about cultures that I'm not. there's a lot of cultural issues about tribes and tribalism and cultures in my books. And the other memory that stands out was going on a farm mission. We were on a potato mission in Ukraine. In societies that have lost so much, everybody had lost members of their family. They're so generous. They're so generous. So we would go on some farm mission, right? And we do the business during the day and go around the fields and do stuff. And then the village, we go to the village hall, which was then usually the collective farm hall. And they put everything they had on the table. Absolutely everything. They probably wouldn't have eaten for another 2 or 3 days after this, for us, And the amount of drink, because in that part of the world, the trust levels are very low. You can only trust someone when you've seen them absolutely paralytically drunk, because then they're very, very hard to hide. And then they'd all start, all Ukrainians know 1 million songs. We don't know any, and someone will start singing, and then everybody starts singing, and they all sing in parts as well. And so I got this sense of, what would it have been like, this is how people were before television and in tribal society. If you were in the ancient world and you were a guest 2,000, 4,000 years ago, this is how you'd be treated when you came to someone's village or their home. So I think these people, again, they taught me from real experience what it was like, this whole idea of host and guest and the rules about tribal society, which again features a lot. And I think it's a great lesson for all. When life is unbearable, your community is the most important thing in your life. My first book, the one about you don't need a job, there's a very good idea behind it. What I didn't understand then is, I used to write a lot, blogging. I was writing thousands and thousands of words a year, but that's not a book. And what I've learnt to my cost, I'm embarrassed by my first book, is that a book has a structure to it, and just writing interesting stuff isn't good enough. And so I've now learnt after 15 years a lot about structure, and whereas my first book is pretty chaotic actually and doesn't hold together very well, and I'm actually sadly embarrassed by it. But I've now got these habits about how to form a story, editing, all those kind of things, that I don't make those mistakes anymore. Yeah. I think if you write, you have to have read a lot. And I was a compulsive reader. My mother bribed me, a bit like drugs, she would read me stories. And then when I was about 6, she said, that's it. No more stories, here's a book, read it yourself. Well, of course it was terrible, the first one, but I was reading things like War and Peace when I was 8, and I still read 2 or 3 books a week. When I went to university, I read history, and I love history, and my novels are set in the past, and my recent non-fiction, the last 10 years, has been historical, and a lot of it's to do with Roman times, and there's an English writer, long dead now, called Rosemary Sutcliffe, and she was supposedly a children's writer, but she always said, I write for people between 8, or for children between 8 and 80. And her books had an enormous influence on me, as they did many other people living in England of my age. She really introduced me to storytelling and historical storytelling. And she herself was the most extraordinary character because she, as a young girl, had juvenile arthritis. Juvenile arthritis is you basically can't move. You're in agony the whole time. She spent almost her entire childhood in bed. And her books are about centurions and Vikings, and they have all these adventures, and they've got big horses, and they always have big dogs, and it's a heroic writing. And all this came from this tiny woman who could barely move. Hi, I'm Rob Paterson, and you're listening to CIDI.
Could you tell us where we can find your work?
Yes, I have a website called Trusted Space Books, and it's got all the books on it that are currently available. And it doesn't have my workbench, but you'll find everything that is available on that, and some of it's free.
Do you have any social media?
Yes. So I have a Twitter account, and I use Facebook, and I often refer to various things on that too.
I would like to acknowledge the support of the Official Language Minority Community Media Consortium and the Government of Canada for the Community Media Strategic Support Plan.